After more than 20 years at the Office of Management and Budget, my next guest jumped from the frying pan to the fire. He recently took the job of Chief Operating Officer and Acting Chief of Staff at the Social Security Administration, SSA, the agency that ranks dead last in the list of large agency best places to work. Joining me with what he plans to do first, Dustin Brown. Dustin, good to have you in.
Tom, thanks for having me.
And golly, the obvious question, 23 years, I think it was, at the Office of Management and Budget. What attracted you to Social Security?
Well, one of the responsibilities we have at OMB is to look across agencies on their customer experience, performance, workforce, as you mentioned. And it was pretty clear Social Security was in a customer service crisis. And I think that's why the President asked Martin O'Malley to come in as the new commissioner. And Martin O'Malley is actually somebody who I've always looked up to as a hero in the performance management community. Obviously, he started the STAT movement across all city operations at the city level and at the state level. And I was really interested in joining up with him and helping him address some of those challenges that you mentioned. In fact, actually, as I was starting out in OMB, I attended city STAT meetings and state STAT meetings in Baltimore and Maryland to see it firsthand and actually used kind of what they were doing to help inform our federal performance framework.
And I want to get into some of those details, but briefly, this new job you have, Chief Operating Officer, that's a brand new position.
That's right. Other agencies have that role established, whether that's CMS or IRS, and it seemed like it was something that would be really helpful for SSA as well, especially given just how operational of an agency it is.
Right. That's the thing people don't often understand. It's not really a policy-making agency at all. It's purely operational in that it carries out what policy is for Social Security benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. There are 1,200 field offices across the country, and we're assisting over 74 million people. Just the magnitude of the number of calls or office visits is really extraordinary across the country. And having a leader like Martin O'Malley come in with that sort of performance management acumen into an agency like this, I think has been a really good fit.
And the rising tide of boomer retirements, and golly, it's going to be the millennial generation right behind the boomers are going to start to retire soon. Is that one of the central challenges of the agency, just the sheer volume of Americans as the country ages?
Completely. I think it was like 12,000 a week are turning 65, and we're seeing more customers that the agency is providing services to than ever in its history, and yet we're also at a 25-year staffing low. So the combination of those two things has certainly been a central challenge to the agency in terms of engagement levels, some of the customer service challenges that you mentioned being the most exhausted workforce across the federal government. That is a fundamental dynamic and one that we're hoping to address by hopefully increasing our funding for the agency kind of consistent with what the president's requested.
Right. You want to be almost like the IRS, which is trying to fix its customer experience problems, but they got favored in one of the big bills for 10 years of funding. They won't get it all, but they've gotten some of it already.
Yeah, we're doing everything we can to make the case to Congress. The Commissioner had a number of hearings a couple months ago that were able to deliver that message to Ways and Means Committee and Senate Finance and others, and he's meeting with a number of members in the appropriations committees as well. That's going to be critical if we're going to be able to make progress on some of those customer service challenges. That being said, we're doing everything we can with performance and process improvement efforts to make sure we're using the funding we do have most effectively and efficiently to address some of those core challenges the Commissioner laid out when he first came in.
And what will you focus on first? I mean, what are your marching orders? The Commissioner called, said, Dustin, come on aboard. Here's what you got to do.
Well, they were pretty clear. In the beginning of January, Commissioner sent an email out to all SSA employees laying out 3 priorities. First is reducing the customer wait times on our national 800 number. Second is reducing the average processing time for disability determinations. And third was, addressing the injustices of overpayments and underpayments, which obviously had been in the news quite a bit recently as well. So we had those priorities very clearly established. And the interesting thing about those is no one component of SSA can really address those on their own. You really need policy, general counsel, technology, operations, and other parts of the organization to come together to be able to make meaningful progress on those. And the security stat effort that the Commissioner set up every 2 weeks, getting all those folks around the table to identify actions we can be taking to make progress on those, I think, has been instrumental to seeing some of the early results that we've been able to identify.
And who sits in on those security stat meetings?
So it's the deputy commissioners in each of the major components of the agency. Obviously, the commissioner runs the meeting, and we have 8 different topics we rotate through, and the senior officials leading those efforts are kind of in front of the podium going through the latest data that we have. And that is one of the things I've been very impressed with. SSA has just extraordinary, even real-time data that they're able to bring up and help identify whether the actions that we've identified and started implementing are actually having the result we intended. And we can do that on a pretty frequent cadence. This is not, your annual budgeting and annual performance reporting. This is every 2 weeks looking at steps we can be taking.
We're speaking with Dustin Brown. He's the new Chief Operating Officer and Acting Chief of Staff at Social Security. And speaking of information technology, at one time the agency was strictly a mainframe check production operation, and it was pretty easy to plan what was needed in IT. You knew how many recipients would be coming. I mean, the actuaries keep you pretty well informed at Social Security, and then you just plan the capacity needed for the checks that you were going to write. What are the big IT challenges now? Because you need this real-time data analytics, and you also need digital services to help the phone service and to help the online service.
Well, one of the most important steps I think the commissioner took was recruiting a new chief information officer. Marcela Alava Escobar came over from the White House and has great kind of background in the private sector and then some in government, and is really listening to those folks on the front lines to understand what items they need in order to better assist customers. One of the wonderful things about Social Security is the things that our customers need and the things that our employees need are largely the same. And so there's a win-win opportunity in terms of delivering more efficient services. Obviously, we are still working on legacy systems across the board, and there are a tremendous number of kind of workaround solutions that have been identified in the regions or in the headquarters, and really understanding what those needs are and helping us prioritize those things according to what's going to move the dial on those 3 priorities I mentioned is where we're starting.
Now, as I mentioned at the outset, Social Security is at the bottom of the list of best places to work with pretty poor engagement scores, in the low 50s. And what is it that is driving, do you think, the employees feeling that way about the agency based on the FEV scores?
Well, I think it comes back to the just fundamental dynamic of assisting more customers than we ever have in the history and having the lowest staffing levels in 25 years. The combination of those 2 things, I think, has led to a workforce that's exhausted. And we're seeing it also, unfortunately, in our attrition levels. Certain areas of SSA, for instance, in our call centers, are seeing attrition rates of over 20%. And that's just not sustainable. And we need to be able to do a better job, I think, supporting them and also giving them the tools they need to be able to assist the customers in the way that we know they want to. One of the things I've really enjoyed about the job is being able to get outside of the D.C. or Baltimore area. I've traveled around to, Philadelphia, New York, Miami, Atlanta, Tennessee, to be able to sit and talk with those customer service representatives and others to get their feedback.
Just give us some numbers. How many employees are there altogether, and how many of those are on these front lines of customer service?
Yeah, we have about 56,000 employees, and I think about 45,000 of them are outside Baltimore.
Yeah, so they're in call centers and they're in offices because Social Security still has storefronts.
Yeah, 1,200 field offices, exactly. And then we have call centers as well, and then we have processing centers spread across the country.
So it's that 46,000 or so that are outside. That's the frontline people. That's what's driving the scores and what's also the recipient of the workloads.
Yeah, and the commissioner understood that. I mean, one of the things he did within his first 3 weeks was get out to every single region in the country and not just do town halls, which were, I think, really helpful to hear directly from employees, but listening in on calls with call center representatives and seeing kind of the interactions between customers and employees firsthand. So I think that was really helpful in accelerating the learning curve and giving us just a better understanding of what the most pressing issues are for the front lines to help inform what our agenda is at the headquarters.
It sounds like there's 2 problems here, or 2 challenges, let's say. One is having enough people, but the other is giving the people you have the right tools and business processes to get more efficient. You've got call